It's on. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's no arrangement, so you can sit whatever you need. We did it before. Okay. And where is Kitty? Kitty? Good. What? What do you want?
Where do you want?
First, we have to do a picture.
With this guy, still I was at
Okay.
if I was still right now.
Nice to meet you.
Whatever you want it to be.
From the green card.
Yeah, right.
That's it. GCM.
Okay. So I think that the instructions is that we need to wear this.
Why?
It's a silent disco thing. I mean, because if I do this, people listen to me.
Do we have to put these on?
I never had that problem before in terms of like people not hearing what I say, but you can wear it or not. Anyway, so thank you so much. I think we can go? Right. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I know it's Friday. You don't know which day it is when you are in COP, but it's actually Friday somewhere, and it's very late. So what we're going to do first is, there's no keynote to speak or anything. We are going to go straight to the bone on this, and we are going to do this in 1 hour, right? So all of you are going to have, like, you were expecting to be here until 7. No, we're going to give you 30 minutes back. It's already optimization of resources, right? So you can do whatever to do with those. This is our gift to you on a Friday afternoon, 30 minutes back to your life. But I'm very happy, right, to be here because this is the panel they call curated panel, because I have some of my favorite people in the development space today with me, and actually it's a common place, but I'm going to say honor and humble, but I am actually, and I'm really excited about this. Obviously, this is a COP that has been labeled as a finance COP, right? But I really feel that we should start like calling these things by solutions, right? I mean, I think, I want to approach this as from a solutions perspective, solutions COP. And obviously, it's very easy to get bogged down by what things are not happening, but it's a lot that actually is happening. And I think that is the optimist part of me that actually gives me, give me hope about this. I think that there's a lot of also people that are coming to decision-making positions that really have that drive for making changes and actually focusing on what we need to do. I think we spent a lot of time already by defining the problem. I think the problems are already kind of defined, and so now we need to actually do things about it. So let me introduce, I don't know if they need any introduction, but let me still introduce the panel today. So Sir Danny Alexander, Chief Executive Officer of infrastructure, global infrastructure of HSBC, recent title, Danny, formerly my boss. Right? I don't know if you quit or if you left shows because of that, but anyway. So a pleasure to have you, Danny. Then we have Amer, who is a very long title, Amer, so I need to actually read it. Is the Director, the Department of Strategic Partnerships and Co-Investments and the Green Climate Fund, but basically it's a rainmaker, right? Amer actually is there to actually make things happen. Then we have Kitty, also, Acting Vice President of Investment. No, that's the other thing. Sorry, Katie. Vice President, you already are being confirmed as Vice President, Kitty. Thank you so much. The Southeast Asia at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. And then, last but not least, we have Pradeep, who is the Executive Director of UNCDF, also doing an amazing job in actually turning that around. And as I said, one of the best kept, well-kept secrets of UN that now, thanks to Pradeep, is starting to be known much more, broadly. So what we try to do is keeping this around like 30, 35 minutes for the panel, right? And then we will try to actually keep this interactive. So if you have questions, I'm sure that you have, then we can actually leave some time for that. So this is going to be very simple, very open. We are going to do 3 rounds, and the first one is about, problem definition, gaps, main blocks that actually you are looking on right now. I mean, the end of this is actually, what we're trying to solve here is, obviously we need to mobilize private capital. This is the job, right? I mean, I always talking about it. We have been talking about it for a while. There's a question of who is leveraging who, right? Whether the private sector leverages the public or the other way around. But really it's something that, it seems to me that it's not that actually because being repeated, right? We don't have to keep talking about it. So the first one is, each of you, I would love to get your 2 minutes on what are the key, from your different perspective on the different institutions, what are the key blockages that you see, right, from your perspectives in terms of like private sector mobilization? And the more specific you can be, the better, right? The second round is going to be about what you see happening right now that actually excites you. Right? Be positive, optimistic. What are the things that excite you? And then the last one will be around what you would like to see happening more of, right? And in particular also among us, right? How we are working together. I mean, we are from myself, I'm Rodrigo Salvado, I'm the Director General of Operational Partnerships of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, one of the newest NDBs in the world, but also the largest in number of shareholders after the World Bank. We have 110 shareholders right now, members, and we have operations at the global level. So anyway, let me start with you, Danny. And also, I love the fact that you are crossover, from the NDBs to the private sector. We have been trying to do this from the NDB side, and now you can go from the other side and say, oh, okay. So what actually are the main blocks that you see right now?
Well, firstly, Rodrigo, thank you very much. And it's great to be back with my old colleagues at AIIB. Thank you very much for having me back after I walked out on you all, after 9 years as Vice President. I am in my 2nd week at HSBC, so it's a bit early to be opining too much on the detail. But I mean, I remember at AIB we spent a lot of time thinking about what these barriers are, and you can look at it in different ways, right? So there's barriers in terms of just getting the right structures so that different kinds of finance can work together. Right. So for a private sector institution, easy to finance, perhaps, let's say wind power in Europe, where the regulation is clear, where the policy barriers are more limited, although there are still challenges, right?
Right.
But then you go to other jurisdictions, maybe the policy framework is not so clear.
Right.
That's a big issue.
Right.
At AIB, we started to do climate policy-based financing,
right.
precisely because we saw that as an issue. In order to get the financial returns necessary to enable the private sector to come in, then in areas where the bankability is much more marginal,
right.
You need to put together blended finance structures so that you have different kinds of finance coming together. And I mean, this is a brilliantly curated panel because you see many different kinds of finance represented here. And so on the optimistic section next, right. I'll come to talk about some of the sort of platforms and structures that we're involved in. But actually, one of the things I found when in the MDB system, right. was that MDBs still, despite all the reforms, despite all the changes, are a bit too conservative, right. About the risks that they're willing to take, which right. is why philanthropic organizations, financial intermediary funds, UN organizations also become more important in this space. But actually, that also leads to another risk, which is a fragmentation. That you see lots of little initiatives all over the place, and none of them with enough scale really to deliver. And so we have to both be innovative and try lots of different kinds of things, but also be willing to scale up quickly those that work and abandon those that don't. as opposed to persisting just because we've happened to have started something, even if it's not quite doing the trick. I'll stop there.
Very good, Danny. And again, I mean, I think I totally agree with you, as you know, about the NDBs, and I think this tension about what we have in our name, which is development banks, right? But in many cases, we are way too conservative to actually do that development, and then at some point, it's like, you know, we need to figure out if we are going to keep development in our name, probably we need to be a little bit more risk takers. Amer, I feel the pain because, you know, there's a lot of eyes on the NDBs, right? The NDB reforms, and there's a lot of eyes also on the climate funds, right? And in GCF, frankly, you know, I think it has been in the eye, and you know, decisions about, like, you know, how you mobilize more money and how you do it and the structure and all that. And I know you actually are doing a lot of that under Mafalda's leadership, right? And also the whole organization. So we'd love to hear, you know, in this new, I would say the new life of the next phase of the GCF, what are the things that actually you're going to focus? Because one of the, you know, I know you're trying to prioritize.
No, thank you very much to inviting me to this panel. It's always very hard to follow a politician or a former politician who spoke so eloquently. And let me say, I voted for you, and you should never have been out of office. But we'll discuss that another time. It's a great question. I mean, I think the barriers are twofold. One is the institutional barriers. What are the problems with the institutions themselves? And, you know, when you read some of the reform recommendations, fantastic recommendations, but these are the same recommendations that we've been reading every year. And I think we need some more action-forcing events. We need the shareholders and the big donors to really push for certain changes to be made. And that's what's happening at the GCF, as you rightly said, under Mafalda's new leadership. When she joined just about a year ago, we're transforming the organization. So we have recreated ourselves into a regionally focused organization. We're moving our processing times to 9 months for deals as of next year. So when investing in emerging markets, that's very competitive to the private sector as well. And we're making it easier to work with us, which has also been a big barrier. And then on the other side, we're also being much more innovative with the money we have. We've got highly flexible capital, so it can be structured as debt or equity, both with varying degrees of concessionality. And we also do grants, guarantees, and project preparation facilities. So on paper, we should be the most attractive partners, or at least one of them, for the private sector. And so we need to get our message out there, show it, and then also be much more innovative in how we structure those transactions. We need to think about, okay, if we're putting in interesting financing structures in a capital layer, and we might put in long tenor debt, for example, let's not sit on that debt for 20 or 30 years, because the risk-return profile of transactions change over time. So we should be refinancing, taking our money out and recycling it back in, and then letting other financial providers and advisors like HSBC take that on and syndicate it out to the private sector. So those are some of the challenges, and I think by us being able to deploy our capital smarter, we can begin to address the perceived risk versus actual risk challenge, which has always existed. And we can put in very patient equity and really help companies show the de-risking. And then that brings in the private sector as well. So I think there's a big onus on organizations like ourselves and yours as well to be much more proactive and innovative. And I think as we do that, the private sector will respond, because they respond to those sorts of incentives. I was a long-time private sector investment banker, so working in the public sector is very new for me, and I'm not 2 weeks into the job, but I'm 6 weeks into the job. And so I can make promises as well. So those are some of the elements, I think, to consider.
That's great, Amir. Thank you so much. And again, I mean, I agree with that. Again, I mean, my sense is that the money is there, but it's actually very hard to use. It's totally useless, right? And I think, you know, and we are sitting on those pots of money, and they are not moving. I mean, one of my senses is that everyone is talking about more money, but we don't put enough emphasis on how we move the money that is already there. Speaking of Chia, right, Kitty? Basically, obviously, the one point is like, you know, philanthropists need to put the money there and everything, and believe that by putting money there, then things will happen. And that's not the case. I mean, I myself worked 10 years at the Gates Foundation. I'm still recovering. But the thing is, that is not that easy, right? And so I would love to hear also from your end. Also, you are going through new leadership in GAP, and I think some changes on your end as well. So what are the problems then, the GAP things that are the ones that you want to really focus on as you try to mobilize the capital?
So thank you for the opportunity. Today GAP turns 3. So today we're 3 years old.
Congratulations
Thank
today.
you. Thank you.
Right.
GAP stands for Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We are a global organization. We work in Global South. We want to make sure the energy transition happens and to secure a safe, affordable future for the population that really are in desperate need of that.
Right.
We care about people on the planet, and we measure our work with carbon access and jobs, which means how much carbon are we avoiding,
Right.
how many access to renewable energy are we creating, and in that process, how are we thinking about the jobs aspect?
Okay.
So GAP is the abbreviation. I've got people asking me which app company you're working for. It is the Global Energy App. So GAP is very much of a startup trying to graduate from a startup stage
Right.
and getting into more of a mature organization.
Right.
But the creation of GAP actually was due to the thinking around, in the philanthropy world, what can we create to be a useful agent for all the players that exist in the ecosystem and doing already what they're best at.
Right.
So the experimentation began with trying to create something that's a market-based philanthropy. It's a market-facing philanthropy. So in my brief time here, what we've experimented in Southeast Asia, in particular with the market-facing organization, is that we're trying to structure TA that's going to target projects. So project will happen as a result of the TA. We are an LP of Southeast Asia's first blended finance clean energy fund. We've done direct project investment. We have been a co-creator of FastP, the biggest pillar focused on greening the grid, which is a $2 billion blended finance platform that's going to spin off different funds, but focused on brown assets to green. So in these multiple layers of TA, project, fund, and platform, we have tried to disperse the dollars in grants, recoverable, returnable grants, in concessional loan, debt, guarantee, as well as direct investment and equity. So if you think of this as a grid, it's really kind of trying an error and trying to see what philanthropic dollar can really do in looking at the gaps in the market and trying to experiment and see what could happen when we inject money in there. So perhaps my perspective is a little bit different from the previous two panelists. I would say what I see is, number one, the challenge in the philanthropy space is that there are $800 billion of philanthropic dollar dispersed every year.
Right.
However, right now, with all the poverty alleviation, disaster relief, education, poverty, women, gender issues all merging, it is merging under the climate backdrop.
Right.
And philanthropy community need to rethink about the way we traditionally dispersed money,
Right.
and what are the ways that we can broaden the current spectrum. Because philanthropy has been doing a lot of good work. I'm sorry you're recovering, but based on that good work, that could be potentially a spectrum
Right.
of things that we can kind of broaden our horizon and try in terms of what that dollar, which is 100% risk-seeking, can do.
Right.
Number two, I don't see enough voice really championing for just energy transition, which is focused on the vulnerable communities, the people, and people who are losing jobs, livelihoods, who's
Right.
losing energy access in this
Right.
process.
Right.
So philanthropic community, and also when the financiers are sitting at the table, there has to be some voice carried in that group, in this
Right.
conversation.
Right.
And I would say, maybe in addition to what's been discussed already, I would say we don't have a level playing field for a lot of the new projects and deals and subcategory of investments that should happen and that haven't happened, because the lack of level playing field, because there are so many advantages, there are so many leaning policies towards traditional fossil assets and industries. And when it comes to, for example, innovative financing models, innovative technology, innovative business model, we don't quite have the even field for new players to come in. So my last role was with Impossible Foods, which is a plant-based meat company that
Right.
focused on food tech. And my whole life, it's dedicated to the interruptive, sort of disruptive industry. And you can see when something like that floods the market, it comes into the market. The other side is the animal meat. It's the same with renewable energy in terms of
Right,
trying to
right.
phase out and trying to phase in certain solutions.
Right.
So having that level
Yeah.
playing field is absolutely critical.
Right. Very good, Kitty. Thank you so much for that. And again, I mean, with Kitty, we were in another panel together, right, later early today. So we're kind of doing the roadshow. But that was about like a people-centric approach, right? And again, I mean, and it's important. I mean, Danny talked about regulation, right, and all this. So we cannot actually forget that we are doing this not in a vacuum of things. It's not about the project also, but it needs to make sense for people and for countries, right? President Jean, the president of the AIIB, always said, you know, he had this discussion with the former Minister of Finance of Senegal, right? And the Minister of Finance says, you know what? We actually found gas and oil, and people is telling us that we cannot touch them. That cannot be the answer, right? And actually, it's kind of but also it's about like, you know, jobs and all that. So I think there is more obviously that what we want to do, and I agree. I mean, the sort of philanthropy. There is also some sort of effectiveness of philanthropic money that really, you know, needs to be. So, Pradeep. Also new in the job, maybe no, I don't know. You can tell how long you have been there, but also I think you know, you're doing an amazing job in the UN Capital Development Fund. I don't know how many people actually feel like know that you exist, that the institution exists, and what you do. So it would be great to have that, and also your vision of what are the problems that you're going to be. Also, I would say because we are getting into the FFD4 year in 2025, which I think, you know, is a very important one for the UN.
I was just gonna say, Kitty, at least you're lucky that they associated you with an app. I don't think people know what to associate us with. But maybe I'll give a little bit of an explanation. So yeah, I'm 6 months into this job after nearly 18 years at UNDP, and I think I have found a little piece of magic in the UN that actually has been hiding or was hidden for nearly 60 years.
Right.
And it's interesting to realize that this is an organization that somebody thought in 1960 would be necessary against a backdrop of the emergence of the Bretton Woods institutions, that some countries would still be left out of the capital markets that these institutions were being set up to support. And I think once IDA started to flow, I think in the early 70s or thereabout,
Right.
I think CDF effectively became orphaned at best. And it kind of languished in the UN vortex. And eventually it was adopted by UNDP and hosted as an autonomous organization. But it didn't really fulfill its original capital mandate. It's the only UN platform, not many people understand that it's the only UN platform that can deploy on the back of grant funding, guarantees and loans.
Right.
So it's seeking, as you said, a highest risk possible.
Right.
So for me, it's a bit of a startup, really. At least I see it as that, because it's going through a major restructuring. And the reason I'm advancing that is if CDF, the Capital Development Fund, is not able to fulfill that niche role in the market to be that absolute risk taker that goes into, you know, difficult markets because they're difficult, and starts to deploy its different instruments to crowd in others by taking that first hit, I think that's an incredibly important role to play, and one that will address many of the constraints that all of us, all of you, are facing, right? You need someone to go in there and deploy a guarantee against currency risks, guarantee that unlocks domestic capital, and is able to do that not in 9 months, but in 3 months, in 5 months. I want to get to that level of pace of operations.
You're going to push Amer out of the market. That's what I'm saying. That's basically.
No, I mean, they're important. We're not going to be dealing at that scale of funding and financing, but we need to go in and get things started, right? And this, I think, is something that is missing. And I say this also after nearly so many years of experience working on the UNDP side, deploying GCF and JEF funding. You know, the problem for us has always been on that side, there's always a major gap between the deployment of grant funding and the availability of financing for scaling up. Right? And it's a frustration that exists in the market, right? You build up your regulatory frameworks, you build up your capacities, you develop your pipelines, and by the time you've done all of that and then applied for funding for the scale up, you lost like years. And that's no good. We have to figure out a way in which we can close out that gap much more, and make the system work a lot more seamlessly. So what I'm trying to do is take CDF in that direction where, we do have our trust fund, and deploy that trust fund in coordination with others who are operating in this same space and really prepare the groundwork for the larger streams of finance. And I think if we can do that will add value. The other thing I would say is that, and we often forget that, and I know the big problem right now is how do you crowd in financing? But when you do crowd in financing, it's not like the game is over, right? We have examples where we've done everything we could and brought in partners and crowded in finance, but then something happens that challenges those that are being supported. And a good example I have is a company that we invested in Zambia, who started off as a startup. They produced clean energy and supported about 10,000 farmers, worked beautifully for a couple of years until the Southern African drought hit. And the farmers stopped making payments. And in turn, the company effectively became a distressed asset. Right. Now, in those instances, I mean, it's not that the company had a bad business model. It was just fighting the elements. Right. And I'm afraid that there's nothing really in the market to be able to cater to those types of entities. Right. And we're going to see a lot more of that. It's just logical. You're going into a world where extreme events are going to become much more frequent, and which means that our financing solutions have to also cater to that stochastic nature of the environment in which we're going to be. So if you think getting capital to some of these places is hard enough now, I mean, imagine 20 years from now. Right. We're going to have to operate in a completely different paradigm than we are now, and we're going to have to be ready for that kind of stochastic nature. So I think it's going to be very difficult for credit-rated institutions that are highly regulated to have that kind of flexibility. Yeah. And that's where I feel a UN Capital Development Fund working alongside the more established institutions can actually help weather some of those storms and help some of these early stage incubators get to a level of maturity until they can be scaled up with finance from the market. Right.
Well, great, Pradeep, and again, you touched on many things there. I mean, I always, Andrew, I think in the last COP, Andrew Steer said that we need a deal team for the planet, right? I mean, the things. But the same, I think the point is that we need each of us coming from different parts together, right, in order to actually accompany the deals. And it's not only about actually getting the money in. I mean, Kitty was saying like TA, like the first stage of that, but then how we actually raise the capital and how to deploy the capital, how accompany the deals, as they go, right? And I think, again, in many ways, Danny knows this because we were trying to actually raise the catalytic capital for a long time in our bank, and we were going to the wrong places, right? And we should have been, Amer and Pradeep, before, probably we have saved, I don't know if Danny would still be with us, but anyway, but the thing is, but this is the things that we need to start like doing, the handshakes, right? And I agree that when I was at Gates, the fear was to this valley of death that happened after we incubate things and then what happens, right? And the whole thing. So Danny, back to you, obviously, 2 weeks into the job, but you have been doing this for a long time in AIIB because you have been a champion of innovation in AIIB. And a lot of what AIIB has been, like groundbreaking deals that we have done in the bank is actually because you have been there. So from your perspective and also your sense, so what are the things that you see that you like right now, and based on what the brands and the things that basically give you some sort of like they said North Stars, right, that you see right now?
So let me give you 3 examples, 2 from AIIB and 1 from my current role. So AIIB, unlike other multilateral organizations, was not sort of born with a large concessional facility of its own.
Right.
We don't have an IDO or an ADF or whatever. So instead, I think we started to do something which is, I think is quite groundbreaking actually, which is the kind of matchmaking approach.
Right.
Where, and using technology to make that matchmaking work more quickly, so that you have a platform, AIIB Plus, where AIIB can work with its concessional financing partners to quickly show deals and find the people who are interested and find the right blend of financing to enable each deal to get off the ground. Likewise, we help with the World Bank to develop a co-financing platform to put multilateral development banks together for large-scale projects. And I think that's about trying to take the sort of blending process out of the sort of bespoke, each one is handmade, to instead having something which is which removes a lot of the frictions from the process and enables people to come together more quickly and to coalesce around projects that they want to finance. Secondly, it's important that these kind of partnerships are not only at the kind of global level or the fund level, but also at the country level. And we hear a lot about in the G20 and elsewhere, people talk constantly about country platforms. But actually, it's a really important point that development partners should work together, led by the country, at the country level, to work out what are the things that they're going to finance together, what are the areas they want to mobilize others for, and so forth. And so, we saw, for example, the benefits of in Bangladesh, of the Bangladesh Climate Development Platform. It led to the first of the AIIB's climate policy-based loans, co-financed with the ADB. It was catalyzed also by the IMF and their Resilience and Sustainability Trust, and it actually created a partnership at the country level. We've seen JETPs in places like Indonesia and Vietnam, which are trying to do the same thing and bring in the private sector as well. And then lastly, I want to mention one that HSBC is involved in. So Kitty mentioned one leg of the Singapore government's FAST-P program. There are too many acronyms in this world. It stands for Financing Asia's Sustainable Transition, I think, partnership. But to their credit, I think Singapore authorities are some of the most far-sighted in the world in this. They've allocated, I think, $500 million from memory to be concessional capital, matched, but on a matching basis with other concessional providers like GIAP, I guess, in order to stimulate activity, which is helping to bring more projects to fruition in Southeast Asia than otherwise would be the case. So a couple of years ago, HSBC and Temasek joined forces to create a platform called Pentagreen. And then just during the course of this week, the next phase of that, which is, they call it GIP, Green Investment Platform, which uses some of the FAST-P commitment from Singapore, concessional financing providers, plus other financiers committing, like HSBC, like IFC, BII from the UK, all committing to this platform, where the idea is to create an environment in which marginally bankable projects, projects that wouldn't quite meet the standards for commercial financing, can be brought to a stage where they can be financed using the blended platform. And I think it's a smart idea, and I think it's one that's kind of scalable and replicable potentially in other parts of the world. So I think that's an example where, again, by bringing different partners together, you can create a platform which can actually deliver some of the things that we want to do.
And also, Danny, thank you so much. It's great. But also, again, it's obvious, but you want to make money with the things, right?
Yes.
Right. So the point is
I
mean, your boss is probably, but
No, it's a key point. I mean,
it's a key point. This
if
is
you,
not.
if you want to crowd in private sector finance, you're not doing so on the basis of,
Right.
on the same basis as you're doing with charitable donations or
Right,
whatever.
right.
And in the end, this transition globally will only succeed if it becomes one of the most important commercial
Right.
opportunities of the century, and that's what we're trying to get there.
Right. My point on that one was, that again, it could be good business, and I think this is not about using grant money to make bad deals look good, right? But actually taking, more good deals to the market. Amer, again, I mean, from your end, right? Again, what are the things that I'm more excited about? Again, I love the fact that, and again, after this, we're going to have like probably 10 of these things, right? Hopefully, and we'll share it with everyone. But what are your top ones, right, Amer, that you see right now that you're excited about? It could be things that the GCF is doing, or things that you see in the market happening and you like them.
No, absolutely. I just want to agree with Danny's point about having a platform approach, a framework which can be easily replicated throughout, and so it's not just done on a deal-by-deal basis. And I think that's absolutely critical. So, what we're trying to do is work with people at different ends of the size scale. So we're doing things with e-mobility in India with Macquarie, for example.
Okay.
We're doing a lot with the Africa Finance Corporation with climate resilience in Africa across multiple countries, and also helping Acumen raise a fund which bridges that gap where people see the underlying pipeline as maybe too risky.
Right.
And so how can we alleviate that by providing junior equity, for example?
Okay.
But to your point about not making bad deals look good with grant, I mean, that's spot on, because we have to make sure that neither side are intellectually lazy in how they're analyzing these deals. So it's not just the private sector coming and saying, look, just give us some more grants, because look what it does to the tariffs.
Right.
We have to go into the modeling. And equally, on our side, we can't be, okay, we'll just give you a loan because it's easy, and that's what we've been doing for 20 years. So I think we have to have a much more sophisticated approach to the structuring on both sides of the equation. There's also a concern on the public side that there's a perception that public taxpayer money is being used to subsidize the private sector.
Yeah.
And so I think when we think about structuring, we also have to factor in much more prominently upside sharing as well. So if a private equity firm needs to make 15 or 16 or 20%, we need to engage on that modeling and say, okay, well, for example, once you're making above 18, we're going to take a chunk of it back. And be prepared to make mistakes. And maybe there will be deals where when you look back, there was an over-subsidization, but maybe that gets compensated by some of the upside sharing. So I think having a more sophisticated approach to that, which we're trying to do with these deals that I mentioned and others, is really important.
Right. I think Pradeep wants to jump in.
I have to say, this is reminding me of a number of conversations in our investment committee in New York, where a majority of our time is actually fighting over whether we're providing too much concessionality, right? So it does get to the question of like, what exactly is a bad deal, right? Particularly when you're coming at it from where we come at it, which is poverty reduction, number one.
Right.
We're trying to develop markets, so we're taking that early stage, risk, and we are trying to curate something that we know isn't going to sort of change markets overnight, but it's going to be sort of an evolution, a gradual evolution, and in that we are going to make some mistakes, right? But I think if you look at it from a sort of a portfolio perspective, we have to be certain that at the end of the day, it is moving the market forward, right? So that ultimately that scale up is possible. But it also then it raises another issue, which is the kind of attitude that I think has to be also sprinkled into this, because we are talking about, at the end of the day, trying to avert all the bad things that's happening because of climate change. You're trying to address development needs. You're also trying to ensure that private sector comes in because there's a business opportunity, and it's not all black and white there. There's so much gray that it's very messy at the end of the day. I don't think any of us really know what's happening, but we're all sort of hoping that the needle is moving forward in terms of crowding in capital, increasing the overall envelope, creating jobs, creating growth, and ultimately, creating a more resilient ecosystem that we all want to see.
Right. All right. Kitty, I love this. Kitty wants to jump in. Yeah, please, Kitty.
I think what we see is there are a lot of platforms being created in the market at the moment. And it's great to see all partners are coming to the table. And a lot of people are using different financial modalities to experiment.
Right.
And it's great when you see a lot of things booming in that field, but what we need to learn collectively as a community is standardization,
Right,
and then the do's and don'ts, and what worked and what didn't, and share that knowledge across different players in this field. So having that right conversation, dialogue, that institutional knowledge sharing among different institutions is absolutely important,
Right.
just to avoid uncoordinated waste of capital. That could have been avoided, right?
Right.
Number two, I want to share that unlike Pentagreen, the part of the FAST-P that we participate in is much more of the kind of nascent stage, one of its kind, never been done before. In the longer trajectory of energy transition, that project needs to happen, but it's not going to happen because it's not economical at the moment.
Right.
So what philanthropic dollar can do, and in particular with blended finance, is making sure you sprinkle enough of that gold dust into a deal to just slightly bend the economic curve enough for that to happen.
Right.
But there are a few things to remember. Number one, I call it a gold dust. We're not throwing around gold bars. But there are a lot of people who thinks that when you have the so-called free money, then you got to give me some because I am doing deals that's at the right side of history. So why don't you give me free money?
Right.
Well, first of all, that doesn't exist. Second of all, there's not enough ever to fill the trillions of dollars of investment gap.
Yeah.
And third of all, this money going into deal has to be going through very, very careful evaluation of why this deal and why this particular subsector of investment option and why this much as opposed to doubling this amount and what is the additionality. So the question is a constant evaluation. Are we putting in too much?
Right.
Are we really needed? 3 months later, do we still need to put in this much or can we withdraw and claw back some money? That should be the thinking around concessionality. And can I say the third thing, which is concessionality doesn't mean impact.
Right.
Concessionality doesn't mean that you're investing in the right deals when it comes to energy transition. Concessionality doesn't mean that you're enabling energy transition and the green side of things and creating the right kind of jobs.
Right. Right.
Concessionality is just a way to enable something to happen. And at the end of the day, we do need to be very mindful what technology we're standing behind,
Right.
what initiative and policy, and what kind of market we are creating. One last point, sorry.
A bonus track.
One last point. We do one of its kind and the first of its kind, right? Thinking that let's try it. Let's do a dance together. So we're gonna all have the group muscle memory so we can do the second dance and the third dance. But sometimes to create the market, it's not really one dance or one project that's going to create the market.
Right. Right.
Sometimes you don't know when that market is going to be created. Maybe it's the third one, maybe it's the fifth one, maybe it's the 50th one. So having that continuation, having that kind of consistency and having the perseverance in making sure that we know what the North Star is, we know why these technologies are absolutely critical when we look at the transition is very important.
I agree with that. I think, a lot of getting the climate thing right will be, obviously we need to shorten the period of, of market and product development, right? Like the technology, we don't have 10 years or 20 years to actually develop these new technologies. They need to be ready, and they need to be ready for a larger amount of countries, not only the rich ones that they can pay for R&D, but also and I do think that picking winners is a big part of this, and if all are actually doing different things, probably we are going to be under the belt. First, before I go to the third one, is Pradeep, you didn't tell me what are your winners, right? I mean, what you like, in 1 minute.
Well, look, I think, look at us, this group.
Look at us.
Right? 10 years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see this.
Right.
It wouldn't happen.
Right.
So for me, I think this is a sign of what is to come. and a lot more of it, because I think we've now finally come to that point that we've actually recognized that unless we join the dots, none of us can actually get very far. So for me, a big win, certainly in Baku, and which gives me hope for the future, is really the coming together of partners with a very like-minded objective and vision, but we bring different things, and we recognize the need to join them up.
Fantastic. Well, that's great, because I would love, and I will going to be in reverse order. So, Kitty, I would love also, again, and following Pradin's lead on what you're excited about, what you like to do more of, right? I mean, again, GAP is playing a vital role, and again, you say, well, I mean, there's no matter how much money of that you put in the market, is always going to be a shortage, right? And I think, so what are the things that you're more excited about? And also, as a vice president for Asia, right? In Asia also in particular, what are your winners? What are your picks?
I think that those are great questions. I think ultimately, we need to work ourselves out of a job and stop using the term climate finance. There's no climate finance from here. It's just going to be finance.
Very good.
So that's the ultimate goal, that every investment we make, every decision we make, is going to be centered around a more equitable, a more sustainable future of mankind and the Earth. In terms of what excites me in Asia, I think it's really being able to make sure that within Asia, which is a very, very diverse region, solving a very, very complex issue. Because you were on the other panel with me, you heard me talking about this a little bit. But Asia cares about economic growth as much as anywhere else in the world, except that Asia has been maintaining a very high growth level for the past 2 decades, and that trajectory is going to continue. So in terms of the energy transition, we're thinking about how to power the economic growth with cheaper, affordable, stable, green energy, while trying to deal with all the possibly stranded assets in the future that's locked in fossil assets. And that in itself is a really complex problem to think about, because it is an extremely messy process. It is extremely confusing and unknown. And for a lot of policymakers, there hasn't been a very clear, imaginable future for policymakers. What we do oftentimes when it comes to net zero is a zero-sum game. It's about what do we take out, what do we supply in order to reach the net zero future. What we do about economic forecasting is based on a model that doesn't speak to the energy models. So there hasn't been a way to link the thinking behind what is the energy growth trajectory that could really provide that kind of affordable energy for the macroeconomic development. Therefore, solving that really interesting problem is what excites me.
Very good. Okay. Great. Wow. All right. Amer, you have to follow that. So, good luck.
I have the hardest seat, really, between Danny and Kitty. No, I agree with everything Kitty said, and let me just add a little bit to it. I have a very pragmatic approach. Like, over the next 6 to 18 months, I want us as a group to have done deals together with some different overlaps. I mean, GCF is looking to do deals with UNCDF, with GAP, definitely with HSBC, with AIIB, and your cousin's New Development Bank as well. We're here to do all of these things, and with others. And let's focus on concrete transactions and structures, and let's get it done. That's the most exciting thing. And I agree with Pradeep. This would not have been the case 10 years ago. And the onus is on us and others who are doing this similar work to actually produce the results. And try and be prepared to fail.
Right. I agree with that. And again, and let's get to work on these things. And again, and have some fun also, right? I mean, that's also always help. Danny, bring us home. So, what else is exciting, for you and obviously, again, I mean, there's a lot of, I think, eyes are on all of us, right? On the UN system, right? On the philanthropy, on the NDBs, on the climate funds, and also on the corporate side. So what is exciting? What is your bright side?
I mean, first thing I want to say is that I think it's quite exciting, and this is from my time at the AIIB, the way over the past 2 or 3 years, through the G20 processes, through the COPs, the international community has come together to say, we want, and this is at a time when, you know, the international community finds it difficult to agree on anything.
Right.
They come together and said, we want to scale up the financial system. We want to scale up the MDBs. We want to stretch the resources, and we want to push for those resources to be used to mobilize the private sector, because we recognize that if we can't scale up the finance, the goals of the Paris Agreement are going to escape our reach. And actually, it's when you look at what's come out of those G20 discussions, you look at the way in which MDBs have responded by scaling up their financing capacity, I think there is something quite hopeful in all of that. That's one. And then I think that you see this ecosystem of partners that is developing. You see it represented here on this panel, from all different kinds of organizations providing different kind of finance with different incentives, different objectives, but aligning around this transition is one that it has to happen. It has to happen in a way that is going to engage with and mobilize the private sector, and it has to shift from being something which is primarily an issue talked about in sort of policy communities into one which is really a commercial opportunity. And if you like, that's almost the transition within the transition that has to go. And so I agree very much with something Kitty said. I'm sure I agreed with all of it, but there was one I wanted to pick out, which was that, in a sense, for you said for philanthropic contributions, we should do ourselves out of a job, right? Now that will take a while, but it's actually the right thinking that your resources can catalyze things where the next round maybe needs a bit less, and then the next round needs a bit less, and then eventually people feel comfortable doing it by themselves. And I think that's the sort of philosophy which also has to encourage us to experiment in the way that Pradeep was saying, to use the resources for and to test, and quickly to test and say this works, this doesn't work, scale what works, drop what doesn't work. And then I think from an HSBC point of view, we've seen many strong partnerships being formed. I mentioned one earlier, Pentagreen, Singapore's FAST-P initiative. Another which confusingly also has the acronym FAST, but is about more about the standards and guidelines side. We're supporting the FAST infra, which means financing to accelerate the sustainable transition infrastructure, which is about standards and guidelines to help attract institutional investors, and to do something which also we were working on at AIIB, which is to transform sustainable infrastructure into a mainstream liquid asset class, so that other kinds of investors feel that they can come in. Right, exactly. So standardization at the project level, standardization in terms of labeling and guidelines. Standardization is key, and technology then can play much more of a role in driving the disbursement of finance.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. Well, I mean, we have 5 minutes. I mean, I don't know. Do we have questions? I would love to really give the floor room for questions. Fantastic. We have many. And okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Deepak Agrawal representing Avada Group. We are a fully integrated energy transition company, right from solar manufacturing to renewable energy and now into green fuels. My question is particularly to Amir and Pradeep is, while renewable energy is now fairly matured and it does not need too much support from a multilateral development bank, but we clearly see there is a support that is needed in the full green hydrogen and the entire green fuels industry. So 1A, what is our outlook on being open to actually fund this industry, not look from a purely commercial bank perspective in a strictly project finance sense, but to provide a kind of a support that is needed so that at least for the initial set of projects before the industry takes out on its own, access to low-cost capital, and that too, especially in a local currency.
Okay.
Because we have been fortunate to have supported by DFIs from France, Netherlands, Asia, ADB in our past journey. But now scale is big. But green fuels is a completely new trajectory, and
Right.
we'd like to really know your outlook on,
Great.
especially support in low cost and the local currency.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are going to take a couple of, and then we are going to review. And again, even when the question might be addressed to some, I mean, if the other of the panelists that want to jump on, let's jump on. Here and then there.
Thank you. My name is Ana Diaz. I work at the International Organization for Standardization.
All right.
So I was very happy to hear you speaking about standards. My question is for all of you, actually. If you could all answer, that would be great, but might not have time. But my question is, how can an organization such as ours or international standardizations work with organizations such as yours to really incorporate international standards into innovative financial mechanisms to, of course, attract more diverse funding, including philanthropic funding, capital? So just wanted to get your feedback on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting discussion. I would like to take the opportunity to brainstorm with this panel based on two premises.
Your name and...
I'm Paul. I work for a climate NGO.
All right.
The first premise is we have to keep carbon in the ground if we want to stay below 2 degrees. And the second premise, which you talk about, is it's hypocritical for the global north to ask the global south to leave fossil fuel in the ground. You mentioned the example of Senegal. So my question and your role for the brainstorming is, could it be possible to invent a climate finance mechanisms to compensate global south countries in exchange for leaving fossil fuel in the ground? Thank you.
All right. We have only 5 minutes, but I mean, it's a good homework. Let me take. Is anyone else wants to make any? Okay, let's take those and then wrap up. Again, the first one obviously. Amer, Pradeep were more on the one, and then actually we have a good balanced portfolio because standardization goes to Danny and Kitty, and then we have the one for all of us. We can tease that up.
Yeah, I mean, first, we are a grant-making organization. We deal largely with local currency at the country level, so that's not a problem. Secondly, we respond to government requests. So if that is a priority of the government, of the country that we're supporting, we will certainly look at it and see what we can do, given who and what we are. But that also includes reaching out and bringing others alongside us. And this is, I think, underappreciated value of the United Nations system. It's not necessarily about what we ourselves are able to do. It's also about convincing other partners in the MDB, community as well, to come alongside us and support us. GCF, Jeff, and others have tended to do in many countries around the world.
Right, Amer.
Yeah, no, very quickly. Also with us, I mean, our money is provided and can be converted into local currency, and we sit with the FX risk at our end, so it's not an issue from our side. And similar to Pradeep, we're country-led. So to the point made earlier about country platforms and making sure it's linked in with country priorities is important. And as long as that fits in, and then we go through our own climate impact analysis as well, then we're very open to having those sorts of discussions.
Fantastic. And I think local currency always is an issue. Kitty and Danny, yeah, you can respond to any of the questions, on this one, standardization, I think, because you mentioned.
So I think two things initially. One is that we need to have the right forum for sharing information. Right now, there are a lot of things that are happening at the same time, and there are a lot of players, and things happen too fast. It's happening so fast, it is hard enough to keep the day going for ourselves, to wrap things up, to finish what we started, let alone in thinking about who are the partners who need to learn, hear from us, who need to exchange on top of that. So some kind of organized construct for information sharing is important. We need to set up a platform where people know that if and when there's a willingness to share, that's a go-to place. Number two is there has to be a willingness to share. So the question of what's in it for me. Oftentimes, I see partners are coming really together to the table. And there are similar trials, actually, at least in Singapore, that people are attempting to gather the information, to gather the partnerships, and then to make sure that people do put things on the table. But we also need to kind of be sensitive towards what can be shared and what cannot be shared, and what is the reason why sometimes hold people up from wanting to share or share a little bit more. So I think once the concerns are addressed, then somebody has to get the work done. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And Danny, also because sometimes, standardization is hard within the organizations themselves, right? I mean, and actually how you bring that from that to operationalization, right? And
So one of the things that we worked on in AIIB, and I think it's a broader challenge, is, and it's something that would really help to facilitate the net zero transition also, is how can you move infrastructure from being something which requires very precise knowledge of each individual project, which is bespoke, in order to invest in, to something which can be invested in as an asset class. AIIB had a couple of, I think, really interesting projects. One in Singapore, again. Singapore keeps being mentioned as a center for innovation. Right. Quite rightly so too. Called Bayfront. And Bayfront is a program to basically take over the ownership of a large number of infrastructure projects from commercial banks and then securitize them, and then provide those securities into the market, infrastructure asset-backed securities. The idea being that gives a much wider pool of investors access to infrastructure projects than otherwise would be able to do so. Right. So that relies crucially on the standardization of information. Why do the bond markets work so well? Because there's a common standard for bond markets all over the world. And if you buy a bond with a certain rating, you know what you're getting. Of course, there are differences, but there's so much standardization that it's commonly understood. And so, could we develop these kind of ideas that enable access to low carbon infrastructure to be distributed to a much wider range of investors? I think it's something that we should be working on, because there are plenty of investors out there who would like, long-term assets that deliver a steady return, which is what an infrastructure project does in many cases, especially in the energy sector. Right. If it's well regulated, once it's up and running and the construction risks are through and so forth. So being able to find ways to get those projects into the hands of that much broader pool of investors would in itself help to channel a lot more finance to the transition. Right. That's an area where I don't know whether your organization or others can play a role, but definitely standardization is critical. Right.
And I think a lot of standardization within the standardization industry will be very good, I have to say, because so many standards, right, that you don't know which standards are. So I don't know, I mean, like I don't know. I mean, the UNDP also have standards, right? Okay. So I don't know, you have to push them out of the market and get your standards then. But anyway, so we have, on the other one, I think on compensation, let me take this one. Right, on compensation, like moderator, I take that one. It's an easy one. So I do think, first of all, I think that everyone is trying to manage this thing, right, on compensation. My personal view is, compensation can only take you so far. Compensation in my mind is that we are able to actually have a transfer of resources that allows to de-risk, what we need to undertake in the developing countries in order to actually make these transitions. And that actually means all the things that we say here, right? It's actually project preparation and project design to actually get the right projects in. It's actually the fall of de-risking the capital, right? And also the cost of financing that actually makes sense, but also it's about the regulation and the macro picture that actually makes sense for each country. In the case of Senegal, thinking that they are going to actually not touch that oil and gas and then, convert all to flying cars is not actually going to be. And my sense on is that we have to be realistic on that. And I think that also has to do with policymakers, not only in their countries themselves, but also in the G20, as Danny said, right? So I think that in my mind, this is what should be, our approach. I mean, finance is not rocket science, frankly. I mean, we know what we need to do. I mean, but the problem definition and the actual definition at the local level of the problem actually is very important. So I'm very happy, I had to say. I mean, it has been my dream panel, right? So I have a wonderful time. I hope that all you have like even the 10% of what I have. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Danny.